The death of my mother was not an accident. I could hardly believe my eyes as I stared at the death certificate, but it was exactly what I saw. My mother, someone I believed would never fall ill seriously, had passed away suddenly with no explanation. And that was just the beginning. As I went through the inheritance documents, I discovered an even more horrifying truth. A significant portion of the family assets had disappeared without a trace. The initial pain quickly turned to anger, but I didn't let my emotions take over. It was like a wave crashing over me, only it made me more alert than ever before. Someone in the family must have hidden the truth, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. All I needed was patience, precision, and time to pull every hidden piece of the puzzle into the light. And I was ready for it. My name is Sarah Peterson, and for as long as I can remember, I had always believed that my family was like any other, strong, loving, and free from secrets. Growing up, my mother was the pillar of strength in our household. She was a woman of grace, intelligence, and quiet power who had shaped my life and values. My father had passed away when I was young, and it was just the two of us. I had always felt a special bond with her, unbreakable, as though we were a team meant to face anything together. But the night she died shattered that illusion. It was unexpected, a blow to the heart I wasn't ready for. My mother had always been healthy, never showed any signs of serious illness, so the suddenness of her death left me in a haze of disbelief. The funeral was a blur of faces, condolences, and tear-filled embraces. I buried my mother with the hope that I would find peace in the inheritance she left behind. I had never questioned her health, her life, or her past. But that was about to change. The discovery came when I started going through the legal documents and the will. It all seemed ordinary at first, the typical formalities that accompany death. But something didn't sit right. As I looked deeper into the papers, I found a startling discrepancy. A significant portion of her assets was missing. And not just a small amount, it was a fortune. The more I searched, the more I began to uncover, but the answers eluded me. Where had all of this gone? I felt a chill run down my spine as I remembered the unsettling conversations I'd had with her in the past. She had always been secretive about certain aspects of our family's wealth, but I never questioned her. Now, in the wake of her death, I was left holding the pieces of a puzzle that didn't make sense. The first thing I did was check her personal accounts. But to my surprise, they were locked, access denied, passwords changed. Her financial records were meticulously hidden. Someone didn't want me to know the truth. I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me. This wasn't just about money. There was something darker at play here. My mother's sudden death, the missing fortune, the locked accounts, they all pointed to one thing. Someone had a hand in her passing, and they were covering their tracks. As I sat alone in her study, surrounded by paperwork, a calm determination washed over me. I couldn't afford to panic. My mother had always taught me to remain composed in the face of adversity. And this was no different. I would find out the truth, no matter how long it took or how many people I had to confront. The secrets my mother had kept were buried beneath the surface, and it was up to me to dig them up. But I had to be careful. Whoever was behind this was skilled at covering their tracks. They had made sure I would be left in the dark. But I wasn't going to let that stop me. I had learned from the best, my mother. And now, it was my turn to uncover the truth, no matter how painful or dangerous it might be. As I stood up and stared at the rows of files in front of me, I knew one thing for certain. The silence in this house wasn't peace. It was a veil, hiding the truth that was waiting to be revealed. And I was going to find it. As the days passed, I found myself sinking deeper into the mystery surrounding my mother's death and the missing assets. At first, I had tried to convince myself that there was some reasonable explanation for it all, something I just hadn't figured out yet. But the more I dug, the clearer it became that there was nothing ordinary about this situation. I was up against something much bigger than I had anticipated. I spent sleepless nights in my mother's study, sifting through papers, making phone calls, and even contacting her lawyer. I went through the family records with a fine-tooth comb, hoping to find some small detail that would explain why so much of her wealth had simply vanished. The first breakthrough came when I called her old lawyer's office. At first, they were reluctant to speak with me, citing the privacy of my mother's will, but I persisted. After much back and forth, they reluctantly informed me of an amendment to the will. An amendment that I had never been told about. It was signed just months before my mother's death, and the lawyer assured me that it had been witnessed and legally binding. That was when I first heard the name that I would soon come to despise, William Rivers. He was my stepfather, a man I had never trusted fully, but whom I had never considered capable of anything nefarious. It seemed absurd at first. How could my mother have left such a large portion of her wealth to him and his children? The more I thought about it, the more I began to realize how little I actually knew about William. He had come into our lives when I was in my late teens, charming and smooth-talking. My mother had fallen for him quickly, so quickly, in fact, that I had never quite understood how they had formed such a deep bond. I had always felt an unspoken tension between us, a coldness in the air whenever we shared the same room. And now, that coldness felt like a warning. The will amendment had been signed in secret, and according to the lawyer, my mother had only mentioned it to him once in passing. It was clear that she had wanted to keep the details under wraps. But why? Was it because she had known something was coming? Had she anticipated that her life might be cut short by something sinister? As I processed this new information, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Why had my mother kept so much from me? She had always been honest and open with me about nearly everything. So, why hide this from me? The pieces of the puzzle were starting to form, but they didn't fit together just yet. I decided to confront William. I knew I couldn't let this go without answers. I had to know what he knew about the missing assets, about my mother's final days, and about the will. But when I reached out to him, I was met with resistance. His response was evasive, almost as if he were trying to brush me off. "I'm sure your mother had her reasons for everything," he had said over the phone, his voice smooth and calm. "You don't need to worry about it, Sarah. Everything is taken care of. I'm sure the estate will be settled soon." I didn't believe him. I wasn't sure what was worse, the coldness of his words or the unsettling calm with which he spoke. There was something about his demeanor that struck me as fake, as though he were hiding something. I knew I had to push harder. But as I prepared to visit his home and demand the truth, another thought gnawed at me. What if this wasn't just about money? What if it was something more? What if my mother had uncovered something about him, something so horrifying that she had felt forced to make a drastic decision? That night, I could barely sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's face. The face of the woman who had raised me, who had been my rock, suddenly gone. I saw the empty space in her chair at the dinner table, and I heard the silence that had settled in our home since her death. But in that silence, I also heard a voice, a whisper, faint but insistent, urging me to keep going, to not stop. I couldn't let it go. I had to uncover the truth. The next day, I decided to go to William's house unannounced. I knew I had to confront him face to face, get the answers I needed, and force him to tell me what he knew about the will, the missing assets, and my mother's death. But when I arrived, something was off. William wasn't home. His car was gone, and the house was eerily quiet. I felt a strange pang of unease, but I pushed it aside. I wasn't going to let fear stop me now. I decided to search his house. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I felt compelled to explore. As I walked through the front door, I was struck by how cold and sterile the place felt, like a home that was never really lived in. It was as though William had no emotional connection to the house, to the life he had built with my mother. As I moved through the rooms, my eyes fell on a small, locked drawer in his study. It was unusual for William to keep anything locked away, especially something so small and insignificant looking. I couldn't resist the urge to open it. Inside, I found a stack of papers, documents I had never seen before. As I flipped through them, I felt my heart race. There were financial statements, bank account details, and most shocking of all, correspondence with someone named Alexandra Vance. The name was unfamiliar to me, but the letters were unmistakable. They spoke of large sums of money being transferred from my mother's account to an offshore bank. It was clear now, there was far more going on than I could have ever imagined. I knew that these papers were the key to unlocking everything. William was involved in something far more sinister than I had realized. But as I stared at the evidence in my hands, I knew that the next step would be the most dangerous one yet. This wasn't just about money anymore, it was about justice, and I was going to get it. I stood there in William's study, clutching the papers that could change everything. My fingers trembled as I processed the information I had just uncovered. The documents I found, those letters from Alexandra Vance, the offshore bank transactions, and the financial accounts painted a picture that was far worse than I could have imagined. My mother had been involved in something shady, something dangerous, and William, the man who had become a part of our lives, was at the center of it all. But the question still remained. Why? Why had my mother kept all this hidden from me? And why had she left everything to William, a man I had never trusted, a man who now seemed like a stranger? I needed answers, but I was no closer to finding them than I had been the day my mother died. I decided I had to confront William, but this time, I wasn't going to approach him like a child asking for answers. This time, I had leverage. The documents in my hand were proof of his involvement in something illicit, something that had likely led to my mother's death. I wasn't going to let him hide behind his charm and lies anymore. The next day, I called him again. This time, I wasn't going to let him dodge the questions. "William, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady and calm, though my mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. "I have something I want to discuss with you, something important." There was a long pause on the other end, and then his voice came through, tight with tension. "What's this about, Sarah?" "It's about the will," I said, cutting to the chase. "And the missing assets, you know exactly what I'm talking about." He didn't respond immediately. I could hear the shift in his breathing, and for the first time, I sensed a crack in his usual smooth demeanor. It was a small crack, but it was enough to give me the confidence to push further. "You don't have to say anything now, William," I continued, my tone colder. "But I have proof. I know about the offshore accounts, the money that was transferred out of my mother's name. You can't run from the truth forever." The line went dead silent for a long moment. I almost wondered if he had hung up, but then I heard him sigh, the sound full of resignation. "I didn't want you to find out this way, Sarah," William said, his voice softer now, almost apologetic. "I never meant for any of this to happen." "Then what did happen?" I pressed, a wave of frustration bubbling up. "What happened to my mother, and what's this about the money? How much was she really worth?" I didn't want to hurt you," he replied, his voice strained. "But the truth is, your mother knew she was in danger. She was involved in something far bigger than either of us could have imagined. She didn't tell you because she didn't want to involve you in it. I think she was trying to protect you, but she got too deep." I felt a cold chill creep down my spine. "Involved in what?" I asked, almost whispering the words. What was she really doing? William hesitated again. Then, as if deciding to finally break the silence that had been hanging between us, he spoke in a low, almost defeated tone. "Your mother. She was laundering money, Sarah. A lot of money. There were people involved that you wouldn't want to know. People who would do anything to get what they wanted. And your mother got caught in the middle. I don't know all the details, but I do know she was scared. The day before she died, she told me that she had made arrangements to get out of it, but I think it was too late." My head was spinning. The woman who had always been my pillar of strength, the mother I had trusted with every part of my life, had been involved in something illegal, something dangerous. And now she was gone, leaving me to pick up the pieces of a shattered life. But there was still more I needed to know. There had to be something more. I couldn't let her death be in vain. I needed to know the full truth. "What happened to her?" I asked, the words barely leaving my lips as I braced myself for his response. "I don't know for sure," he admitted, "but I have my suspicions. She had been followed, watched by people who were connected to the operation she was involved in. I think they knew she was trying to back out, trying to clean up her act. I think they silenced her." His words hit me like a ton of bricks. My mother hadn't died of some natural cause or illness. She had been murdered. I felt sick to my stomach, but I couldn't allow myself to break down now. This was bigger than my grief. This was about justice, and I had a responsibility to uncover the truth, not just for my mother, but for myself, and for the family that I had lost. "Who are these people, William?" I asked, my voice cold and determined. "And where's the rest of the money? You know more than you're telling me." William was quiet for a moment, and then I heard him speak again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know their names, but I know they're dangerous. They won't stop until they get what they want. As for the money, I don't have it. Your mother made arrangements for it to be transferred out of the country before she died. It's all gone now. But there's one thing I do know, there's a file. A file she kept hidden away, one that could explain everything. If you want the truth, you need to find that file." I froze. A file. That was what I had been missing. The key to everything. the file that my mother had hidden, the one that could bring everything into the light. "Where is it?" I demanded. William paused, and I could hear the hesitation in his voice. "I don't have it, but I know who does." The next step in this journey was clear. I had to find that file, whatever it was, wherever it was hidden. It was the only way to uncover the truth about my mother's death and about the people who had taken everything from me. I was getting closer, but I had no idea how dangerous this journey was about to become. The phone call with William left me with more questions than answers. The file, the one he claimed, held all the answers. My mother had hidden it, and now I had to find it, no matter the cost. But where could it be? How had she kept something so important hidden from me, and why had she entrusted its secret to someone like William, of all people? I couldn't waste any more time. Every minute that passed felt like I was slipping further into a world I didn't fully understand. My mother had been part of something dark, something much bigger than I had imagined, and now I was tangled in a web of lies, deceit, and dangerous people. But I couldn't back down, not now. I spent hours in my mother's study the following day, going through every drawer, every file, every box that I could find. I pulled out old photo albums, her personal journals, and a collection of letters from friends and family. But there was nothing, no sign of the file William had mentioned. My frustration mounted. The hours seemed to stretch on endlessly, the walls of the study closing in around me. But then, just as I was about to give up for the day, my eyes caught something in the back of the closet. A small, old-fashioned safe, one I had never seen before. It was hidden behind a stack of old boxes, its steel surface covered in dust. I had to stop myself from rushing over to it. Something in the back of my mind warned me not to get too excited, not to believe that this was the file I had been looking for. But I couldn't help it. My pulse quickened as I approached the safe, my fingers brushing the cold metal. I had never seen this safe before. It was clearly old, much older than the rest of my mother's belongings. It had a combination lock, one that could be cracked with the right knowledge or with the right tools. But I didn't have the combination. I didn't even know where to begin. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the safe, my mind racing. Could William have hidden it here, or was this just another one of my mother's secrets? I felt a strange sense of dread, but I couldn't afford to be scared. Not now. I had come too far to turn back. I went to my mother's desk and rifled through the drawers, looking for anything that might give me a clue. And then, at the very bottom of the last drawer, I found it, an old piece of paper with a series of numbers scribbled on it. It didn't take long for me to realize that these were the digits for the combination. My hands shook as I returned to the safe and carefully turned the dial. One click. Another. And then, the final turn. The door of the safe creaked open, revealing a small, black folder, just as William had described. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I reached inside. The folder was heavier than I expected, as though it were packed with more than just paper. I hesitated for a moment before pulling it out and flipping it open. The first thing I saw was a collection of bank statements, large transactions, wire transfers, and withdrawals, all linked to offshore accounts in various parts of the world. My stomach churned. My mother had been laundering money, just as William had said. But there was more. I flipped through the pages, each one revealing more details, names, codes, and amounts of money that seemed to be more than just a simple financial operation. There were instructions, warnings, and threats written in a language I couldn't quite understand. And then, I came across something that made my blood run cold: a series of photographs. The photos were grainy, but they were unmistakable. One of them showed a man standing outside my mother's house, looking straight into the camera. He was wearing a suit, but his eyes were hidden by dark sunglasses. The other photo was of my mother, standing in front of what looked like an old warehouse, her face tense and fearful. In the background, there was a shadowy figure, a tall man who seemed to be watching her. I felt a cold chill spread through my body as I looked at the photos. This wasn't just about money or corruption. My mother had been involved with dangerous people, and now those people were coming after me. I couldn't deny it any longer. Their eyes were now on me, but I wasn't going to let them win. I had the file. I had the truth, and I wasn't going to stop until I found out everything. I closed the folder and slipped it into my bag. There was no time to waste. I needed to find out who these people were and what they wanted from me. But as I turned to leave the study, I heard the sound of a car door slamming outside. My heart skipped a beat. Someone was here. I quickly glanced out the window and saw a black sedan parked in front of my house. It was too late to hide the file now. Whoever was inside that car had already seen me, and I knew, without a doubt, that they were here for the same reason I was, for the truth. I had no choice but to confront them. As I made my way to the front door, I took a deep breath and braced myself for whatever was coming. This was no longer just about finding answers, it was about survival, and I was ready for whatever came next. My hand was on the doorknob, but before I could twist it, I froze. The sound of footsteps on the gravel outside grew louder. I could hear the faint crunch of boots on the driveway, heavy, deliberate. My pulse quickened. Whoever was coming wasn't here to have a friendly chat. I quickly glanced at the file tucked in my bag, securely hidden, but I knew better than to think I could outsmart whoever was following me. I had no time to waste. I had to think on my feet, move fast, and stay one step ahead. I left the study and headed for the back of the house, my heart pounding in my chest. The back door creaked as I opened it, the cool air hitting me like a slap in the face. My mind raced as I ducked into the shadows of the garden, trying to stay out of sight. I could hear the car doors slamming, the sound of a group moving toward the house, searching for something or someone. I didn't know who they were, but I had a good idea. These were the people my mother had been involved with, the ones who had orchestrated the dangerous games she had been forced to play. The ones who had likely pushed her to the edge. And now they were after me. I moved quickly, staying low to the ground, weaving between trees and hedges, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts. I had to get to my car and get out of here. I needed to disappear, even if just for a while. But I couldn't leave without knowing more. I couldn't let them take the file. My car was parked in the garage, just a few feet away. The doors to the garage were closed, but there was a small window on the side. As I crouched down by the window, I tried to peek inside, my breath shallow as I strained to listen. Voices. Several men, their voices gruff and low. They were talking about the house, the file, and my mother. They mentioned the name, Alexandra Vance again. This only confirmed what I already knew. They were looking for that file. They knew I had it. It was clear now that I was dealing with professionals, people who wouldn't hesitate to do whatever it took to get what they wanted. I couldn't afford to make a mistake. I needed to get out of here, but I had to think carefully. If I just ran, I would be trapped, cornered. No, I had to lead them away from the house first, find a way to shake them off my trail. The front door opened. I could hear the heavy footsteps entering, the crunch of boots on the wooden floors. They were searching every room, every drawer. It wasn't long before they would start looking through my mother's study, where I had left the rest of the documents. I gritted my teeth. If they found that, everything would be over. I needed to move quickly. I sprinted to the garage door, quietly unlocking it, my hand trembling with each turn of the key. It creaked as it opened, and I winced, hoping they wouldn't hear. But the sounds from the front of the house were louder now. The men were too busy searching, too focused on finding what they were after. I slid into the car and started the engine as quietly as I could. The sound of the engine purring in the quiet night air was a small comfort. I reversed quickly, carefully maneuvering the car out of the driveway, making sure the headlights stayed off. I drove slowly at first, my heart hammering in my chest, the weight of the file heavy on my mind. But I knew I couldn't just keep driving aimlessly. I had to find a safe place to hide, a place where I could think clearly, where I could regroup and plan my next move. As I left the familiar streets of my neighborhood behind, I felt a sense of isolation settle over me. The calm before the storm. But this wasn't the time for reflection. I had a file that could bring down powerful people, and I couldn't trust anyone, not even William. The closer I got to the truth, the more dangerous it became. I drove for what felt like hours, my mind focused on the road, but my thoughts constantly flickering back to the men in my house, the file, the pictures, and my mother's mysterious past. I needed to get to a place where I could look through the file without anyone interrupting me. I needed to learn everything my mother had hidden. After a while, I found an old, abandoned cabin on the outskirts of the city. It was a quiet, isolated place, perfect for what I needed. I pulled up to the cabin, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment, catching my breath. I got out of the car, clutching the file tightly in my hands. As I walked into the cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every sound felt amplified, every shadow felt menacing. But I pushed it aside. I couldn't afford to be afraid now. I locked the door behind me, flipped on the light, and spread the documents across the rickety table. The dim light revealed every detail, every word that had been written in my mother's secret life. The offshore accounts, the money, the connections, the photos, everything. But there was one thing I hadn't seen yet. One thing that was hidden within the depths of the file, something my mother had kept from even me. I opened a final, sealed envelope, the one I hadn't dared to look at until now. My heart skipped a beat as I pulled out a photograph that sent a wave of cold dread over me. It was a picture of my mother, standing side by side with a man I didn't recognize. But there was something about the way she looked at him. Something familiar. The man was smiling, but it wasn't a smile I had ever seen on my mother's face. This man, he was important, and I had a feeling that he was the key to everything. I stared at the photograph for what felt like an eternity, my heart pounding in my chest. The man in the picture was dressed in a dark suit, his hair slicked back, his eyes hidden behind a pair of dark sunglasses. My mother stood next to him, her expression one I had never seen before, unsettled, tense, but still trying to maintain some semblance of control. The way she stood beside him, though, felt like an act of submission. She was holding herself back, like she was trying to hide something, like she didn't want to be there. But what struck me most about the photo was the location. The background was unfamiliar to me. A large, rundown building, more like an industrial complex, with steel doors and concrete floors. I had never seen this place before, and there was no reason for my mother to be there, at least not that I could comprehend. I felt my throat tighten. This man, this stranger who stood next to my mother, was someone important, someone she had been involved with, someone tied to everything that had led to her untimely death. I needed to know who he was, but the photo itself gave no clues, no name. Just a man I didn't recognize and my mother, looking far too vulnerable for someone as strong as her. There was a sinister undertone to the image, one that I couldn't ignore. I flipped through the remaining papers in the file, looking for anything that could shed light on this man. And then, there it was, tucked between 2 pages of financial documents, a business card. It was plain, simple, and yet it carried the weight of something much darker. The card read, Marcus Devereaux International Affairs and Consulting. I froze. The name rang a bell, but I couldn't quite place it. It sounded familiar, too familiar. I had a vague memory of hearing it from somewhere, but I couldn't connect the dots. My mother's connection to him went beyond just business dealings. This wasn't just a random contact. It was something more. I stood up, pacing back and forth, the weight of everything settling heavily on me. The photograph, the business card, the offshore accounts, everything seemed to be pointing to him. I had to find out more about Marcus Devereaux, and I had to do it quickly. I knew where to start, the internet, but I couldn't just search his name and expect answers. If he was as dangerous as I suspected, then every trace of him online would be carefully hidden, wiped clean. I needed something concrete, something no one could remove. I went to my car and drove into the city, looking for a place to access more detailed, private records. I couldn't trust the police, not yet. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't trust anyone except for myself. I had already seen how deep this web went. The people involved had no intention of letting me walk away with the truth. I parked in front of a small, discreet cafe near the city center, the kind of place where people went to do business under the radar. I knew the owner, a man who owed my mother a few favors. He had connections, illegal ones, but that was exactly what I needed. I walked in, scanning the room. The dim lighting and quiet chatter made the place feel like a hideout. I spotted the owner, a tall man with a rugged face, sitting in the back corner. His eyes narrowed when he saw me, but he didn't say anything right away. I knew the drill. I walked over, sat down, and slid the business card across the table. Marcus Devereaux, I said softly. I need to know who he is, everything about him. The man glanced at the card and then back at me, a slow smirk crossing his face. You're digging into dangerous waters, Sarah. You sure you want to go down this road? I didn't hesitate. I don't have a choice. He leaned back in his chair, taking a long sip of his drink before replying. Devereaux is no one you want to mess with. He's been involved in everything from money laundering to arms deals. He's got connections all over the world, some of the most dangerous people you'll ever come across. But he's not easy to track. He hides behind layers of security, makes sure no one can get close. I felt my stomach tighten as I absorbed his words. This was getting worse, not better. But I needed answers, and I had to keep pushing forward. "How do I find him?" I asked, my voice steady, but my insides churning. The man considered me for a moment, as if deciding whether or not he should help. Then he nodded, reluctantly sliding a folder across the table. "In that folder, you'll find some leads. It's not much, but it's a start. You'll have to be careful. Devereaux isn't just a businessman, he's a ghost, and getting too close could be dangerous. Even for you, Sarah." I grabbed the folder, my hands shaking slightly, but I kept my composure. I had already made the decision to follow this path, no matter the cost. My mother's life had been stolen from her, and now it was time for me to take back what was mine. "Thanks," I muttered, standing up to leave. The man didn't reply, his eyes watching me carefully as I walked out. I headed back to my car, the folder burning a hole in my bag. I didn't know what I was about to uncover, but I had a feeling it was going to be the key to everything. The deeper I went, the more I realized that my mother had been right to keep these secrets hidden. The people involved in her life were dangerous, and now they were involved in mine. But I wasn't backing down. I couldn't. Not now, not after everything that had happened. I had a plan, and I was going to follow it, no matter where it led. The truth was within my reach, and nothing, not even Marcus Devereaux, would stop me from finding it. I spent the next few days obsessing over the contents of the folder. The leads I had gotten from the cafe owner were scarce, but they were enough to point me in the right direction. There were a few addresses, some off-the-record accounts, and even a name, Alexander Black. The name stood out to me for some reason, though I couldn't remember exactly why. But it didn't matter. I was now fully invested, and the puzzle pieces were starting to come together, albeit slowly. I needed to get to the bottom of Marcus Devereaux's operations. Everything seemed to point to him. He was the mastermind, the one pulling the strings in the shadows. But I knew I had to be cautious. Every step I took brought me closer to a dangerous world, one I was not prepared for, but couldn't turn away from. The next lead in the folder took me to a warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was tucked away in an industrial area, a place that seemed like it had been forgotten by the rest of the world. I had no idea if Marcus Devereaux was there, or if this was just another dead end. But my gut told me it was important, and I had no choice but to investigate. I arrived at the warehouse just after dusk, the sky heavy with the threat of rain. The place looked abandoned at first glance, but I knew better than to assume anything was that simple. I parked my car a few blocks away and walked the rest of the way, trying to stay out of sight. The last thing I needed was for someone to spot me snooping around. The warehouse loomed ahead of me, its windows boarded up, the door padlocked. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years, but there was a faint, telltale sign that someone had been there recently. Fresh tire tracks in the mud near the entrance. I approached cautiously, scanning the area for any signs of movement. The building was eerily quiet. I could hear the distant hum of city traffic in the background, but here, it was as though time had stopped. I moved around the perimeter of the building, looking for an entrance that wasn't so obvious. I found a small, rusted door at the back, its lock old and weak. I pulled a crowbar from my bag, my hands trembling with anticipation. A quick twist, and the door swung open with a loud creak. I winced, freezing for a moment to listen for any sound. When there was nothing, I slipped inside. The air was stale and thick, with the smell of damp wood and metal filling my nose. I squinted in the darkness, my eyes adjusting slowly as I made my way deeper into the warehouse. I moved quietly, sticking to the shadows, trying to avoid making any noise that would draw attention. The warehouse was vast, its floor cluttered with boxes, old crates, and machinery that hadn't seen use in years. But there was something unsettling about the silence that hung in the air. It was too still, too abandoned for my liking. I crept along the rows of crates, my heart racing. Suddenly, I heard a noise. A faint shuffle. I stopped dead in my tracks, holding my breath. There it was again, a soft scraping sound coming from behind a stack of crates up ahead. My hand instinctively went to the gun tucked into the waistband of my jeans. I wasn't about to take any chances. Slowly, I made my way toward the sound, moving cautiously, my ears straining for any clue as to who or what was waiting for me. As I rounded the corner, I spotted a figure in the dim light. A man hunched over a workbench scribbling notes in a notebook. He hadn't seen me yet. I stayed hidden, watching him. He was dressed in all black, his face partially obscured by the shadows, but something about him seemed familiar. Then it hit me, Alexander Black, the name from the folder, the man who was connected to Marcus Devereux. This was no coincidence. I debated whether to confront him right then and there, but I knew better. If this man was truly involved in the operation I was trying to dismantle, I couldn't afford to make a mistake. I needed information, and I needed it fast. I took a step back, but as I did, I accidentally kicked a tin can that was lying on the floor. It clattered loudly, echoing through the vast space. The man froze, his head snapping toward the sound. He stood up quickly, his eyes scanning the shadows. I held my breath, praying he hadn't seen me. "Who's there?" His voice was low, cautious. I didn't wait for him to find me. I spun around and ran back toward the exit. The sound of footsteps behind me grew louder. The chase had begun. I reached the back door, but it was locked. My heart was pounding in my chest as I fumbled for the key to open it. Just as I heard his footsteps closing in, I managed to force the door open and dashed into the night. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, slamming the door behind me and locking it. My hands were shaking as I started the engine and peeled away from the warehouse, leaving the darkness behind. But something had shifted inside me. I was no longer just chasing shadows. I had gotten too close to the truth, and now I could feel the walls closing in. Marcus Devereux and his network were onto me. They knew I was coming for them, and they weren't going to let me get away easily. I couldn't turn back now. The game had changed. My heart was still racing as I drove through the winding streets of the city. The encounter at the warehouse had left me rattled, but there was no time to dwell on it. The information I had gathered from Alexander Black and the chilling realization that they were onto me was enough to shift everything. I had crossed a line, there was no going back. I had to keep moving, but I needed a plan. A way to keep ahead of them, stay one step in front of Marcus Devereux and his network. They were dangerous, more dangerous than I had anticipated. The chase was no longer just a search for answers. It had become a fight for survival. I couldn't afford to make mistakes. I had to think clearly, and for that, I needed to get off the streets and away from anyone who could be watching. I had learned from my mother's past. The consequences of underestimating the lengths these people would go to were deadly. I wasn't about to make the same mistake. The cabin I had hidden at before was no longer safe. I couldn't risk being followed back to it. I needed somewhere secure, somewhere no one would expect me to be. I thought of a place, an old, unused storage unit I had rented some time ago when I had moved to the city. It was out of the way, isolated, and perfect for what I needed. No one knew about it except me. I drove to the unit, my eyes darting in the rearview mirror every few seconds, scanning for any sign of a tail. The last thing I needed was to be caught off guard. When I pulled into the lot, I felt the weight in my chest lift slightly. There was no sign of anyone following me. At least, not yet. I parked the car and took the file from my bag, making my way to the unit. It was a small space, dimly lit, and filled with boxes of old junk I had long forgotten about. It wasn't much, but it was safe for now. I secured the door behind me and sat down on the cold concrete floor, the file spread open in front of me. My hands shook as I flipped through the papers again. Every time I went through them, the same questions repeated in my mind. Why had my mother gotten involved with Marcus Devereux? What was the full extent of her involvement with him? And why hadn't she ever told me about it? I was so focused on the papers that I didn't hear the phone ring at first. It startled me when I finally noticed. I grabbed it quickly, my breath catching in my throat as I saw the name on the screen, William. I hesitated before answering, my pulse quickening. Was he calling to warn me? Had he figured out that I knew too much? "Sarah," William's voice came through the phone, low and urgent. "We need to talk." I held my breath. "What is it, William?" "I know you're trying to dig into things," he said, his voice colder than before. "But you're playing a dangerous game. You don't understand who you're dealing with. These people, Devereux, Black, they don't care who they hurt to get what they want. They will come for you, Sarah, and they'll use anyone to get to you, even me." I could hear the hesitation in his voice, but I wasn't fooled. He wasn't here to help me. He was warning me. But why? Was it out of guilt, or was he just trying to keep me in the dark, prevent me from uncovering the truth? "I'm not afraid of them," I said, my voice steady, though every word I spoke seemed to make my heart pound harder. "You should have told me the truth a long time ago, William. You had a chance to protect her, and now you want to protect yourself." I'm trying to protect you, he snapped. But you're too stubborn to see it. There's more at stake here than you realize. These people have eyes everywhere, Sarah. They know what you've found. You think you're safe hiding out, but they're already watching you. I was silent for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. He was right about one thing: Marcus Devereaux's people were everywhere. But that only made me more determined. I wasn't going to let fear dictate my next move. I don't need your protection, William, I said, my voice cold and clear. I'm going to find Devereaux and end this. No more lies. No more hiding. If you have any shred of decency left, you'll help me. You'll tell me everything you know. There was a long pause, and I thought for a moment that he might hang up. But instead, he sighed, a sound that made me think he was weighing his options. Fine, he said finally, but you need to be ready. The people you're dealing with aren't like us. They're dangerous. If you want answers, you'll have to go through them first. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I sat there in the dim light, staring at the phone in my hand. I had no idea what had just happened. William's warning was clear. He was right about one thing: I wasn't ready for the fight I was about to face. But I didn't have a choice. I had already crossed the line, and I couldn't stop now. The truth was close, and I could feel it pulling me forward. I had already made it this far, and nothing would stop me from finding out everything about Marcus Devereaux and the twisted world my mother had been tangled in. As I stood up and gathered my things, I heard the sound of a car outside. I froze, my heart leaping in my chest. Were they here? I glanced through the small window of the storage unit, my breath catching as I saw a figure moving toward the door. It wasn't a coincidence. They had found me. The chase had begun. And this time, I wouldn't be the one running. The sound of footsteps grew louder, closer. My pulse quickened. I knew they were here for me. They'd found me, just like William had warned. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart hammering in my chest, every breath shallow. Whoever was out there was getting closer. The cold concrete floor beneath me felt like a reminder of how vulnerable I was. But I couldn't afford to be afraid, not now. I took a deep breath and reached for the gun tucked in the waistband of my jeans. It felt heavy in my hand, a cold reassurance that I wasn't completely helpless. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. I could hear them lingering, waiting. My thoughts raced. Should I confront them or should I try to slip out the back? I knew there was no escaping this. I had already uncovered too much. They were coming for the file, for me. The door rattled slightly, as if someone was testing the lock. I hadn't anticipated this. I hadn't planned for them to be so bold. They knew I was here, and they were going to make sure I didn't leave with the truth. Then, a voice called out from the other side of the door. "Sarah, we know you're in there." It was calm, controlled, but there was an underlying threat in the way he spoke. I recognized the voice immediately: Marcus Devereaux. The realization hit me like a wave. He was the one behind all of this. The man who had manipulated my mother, dragged her into his web of lies, and now he was here to finish what he started. I had no illusions anymore. This was no longer a search for answers. It was a battle for my life. I took another steadying breath, trying to quiet the panic rising inside me. If I was going to make it out of this, I had to outsmart him. I had to play this right. "Come on, Sarah," Devereaux continued, his voice smooth but firm. "We don't want this to be difficult. Hand over the file and we can all go home. No more trouble." The temptation to give in was there. It would be so easy to give him the file, walk away, and let the past remain buried. But the weight of my mother's death, the injustice, the lies, it was too much. I couldn't let him win. I had come too far. "Why don't you come in and get it, Marcus?" I said, my voice low, calm, though I could feel the anger bubbling underneath. "But I warn you, if you think I'm handing it over without a fight, you're mistaken." A short laugh escaped his lips. "You don't understand, do you? You're already in over your head. I've played this game longer than you. I have resources, people who will ensure that nothing will stop me from getting what's mine." His words cut through the air like a sharp blade, but I didn't flinch. If I was going down, I was going down fighting. I glanced around the storage unit. It was small, cramped, and gave me little room to move. But the back wall led to an alleyway, a small exit that I could reach if I timed it right. I could escape. For a moment, I hesitated. I wanted to face him, to confront the man who had caused my mother's downfall, the man who had orchestrated her death. But I knew it wasn't smart to go out there unprepared. I needed to think fast. I crept toward the back door, keeping my movements as silent as possible. I could hear Marcus pacing outside the door, speaking in low tones to someone else. He was waiting, planning, but I could use that. I reached for the door handle, my fingers trembling slightly as I gripped it. The cool metal felt grounding in my hand, and I knew that this was my one shot. The moment I opened it, I had to be fast, precise. The sound of footsteps drew nearer. They were about to break through the door. Without another second of hesitation, I threw the door open and darted through it. I ran toward the alley, pushing myself to move faster, my breaths ragged in the cold night air. My mind was focused only on one thing: getting out. Behind me, I heard the crash of the storage unit door as it was forced open. Marcus's voice rang out, but I couldn't make out his words. I turned the corner of the alley, sprinting toward the end of the street where my car was parked. My legs burned, but I couldn't stop. Not now. Not when I was this close to freedom. I reached my car, my hands shaking as I fumbled for the keys. I could hear the sound of more footsteps, faster now, echoing behind me. They were getting closer. I threw open the door and slid into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut just as I heard a voice shout my name from behind. Without a second thought, I started the engine and floored the gas pedal. My car shot forward, tires screeching against the pavement as I sped away from the danger. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the shadow of a figure standing at the end of the alley, watching me go. It was Marcus. He hadn't expected me to escape. He hadn't expected me to get away. But I had. For now, I didn't know what would happen next or how long I could stay ahead of them. But I knew one thing: I had the file and I had the truth. And Marcus Devereaux had made one fatal mistake, underestimating me. I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. The road stretched out before me, empty and dark, but the pounding in my chest refused to fade. My heart hammered like a drum in my ears as I sped through the streets, the weight of the file pressing down in my hands. I couldn't slow down, not now, not after everything that had happened. They were still out there, hunting for me. But for the first time since I'd begun this journey, I felt something other than fear. I felt a sense of purpose. I had the answers now, well, part of them at least. The file was my ticket to ending this, to bringing the truth into the light and making sure my mother's death wasn't in vain. But the path ahead was unclear. Devereaux, Black, they were powerful, and they would stop at nothing to protect their empire. And yet, I knew there was no turning back now. I had one final move to make, one last confrontation. I had to take the fight to them. I drove to the address that had been tucked in the back of the file. It was a place I recognized, a place that once held nothing but memories of my childhood. My father's old office, abandoned for years. The building was dark, windows boarded up, a place untouched by time. It was where Devereaux had orchestrated everything from the beginning, where he had set the wheels in motion that had ruined my mother's life. I could feel it in my bones. This was where it all ended. I parked a few blocks away, my breath shallow as I prepared for what was coming next. I had no idea who would be waiting for me there, or if I was walking into a trap, but I couldn't afford to hesitate, not anymore. I took the file with me, tucked tightly under my arm, and made my way toward the building. It was eerily quiet, the air thick with the remnants of my past. The streets were empty, the silence punctuated only by the sound of my footsteps on the pavement. When I reached the front door, I didn't waste any time. I kicked it open with a force I didn't know I had. The door creaked and groaned as it swung wide, revealing the dark interior. I stepped inside, the dim light from the street lamps outside casting long shadows across the floor. The building felt abandoned, but I knew better. The men who worked for Devereaux, his enforcers, were trained to be silent, to move without a trace. They were here, lurking in the darkness, waiting for me. I moved cautiously through the hallway, every sense heightened. I didn't trust my surroundings. I didn't trust anyone, not even William anymore. And then I heard it, a low click followed by the sound of footsteps. Someone was here. I wasn't alone. I turned the corner, my hand instinctively reaching for the gun in my waistband. There, standing at the far end of the corridor, was Marcus Devereaux. He wasn't alone. Two men flanked him, their expressions cold and unreadable. He looked calm, like he had expected me to show up, like he knew this moment was coming. "I thought you might be here," Devereaux said, his voice smooth, but there was an edge to it. "You've come this far, Sarah, but you're out of your depth. You're too late. You have no idea what you're up against." I didn't flinch. I held his gaze, steady and unwavering. "You don't scare me anymore, Marcus. I have what I need. The truth, the file. And I'm going to make sure it gets out there, no matter what it costs." He smiled, a wicked, almost pitying smile. You really think you can stop this? You think anyone will care about your little documents? People like you don't bring down people like me. We'll see about that, I said, my voice calm but resolute. Because I'm done hiding, I'm done running, you don't get to control everything. Not anymore. Marcus chuckled darkly, shaking his head. You've always been stubborn, but you have no idea what you're up against. These men, he gestured to the two enforcers behind him, they'll make sure you never see the light of day again if you don't walk away. But if you give me that file, I'll let you walk out of here. No harm done. I don't believe you, I said, stepping forward. You don't get to make the rules anymore. This is over. Before he could react, I drew the gun from my waistband and aimed it at him. The movement was swift, fluid, and I didn't hesitate. Get out of my way, Marcus. For a moment, there was silence. The two men behind him shifted slightly, as though ready to move, but Marcus held up his hand, signaling them to stop. He studied me carefully, like he was calculating his next move. You're really going to shoot me? He asked, his voice dripping with mockery. You're a long way from home, Sarah. This won't end the way you think. I'm not afraid of you anymore, I said, my finger hovering over the trigger. This is my mother's story. It's my story. And I won't let you destroy it. For the briefest moment, something flickered in his eyes. It was hard to tell if it was surprise or frustration, but it didn't matter. I wasn't giving him a chance to respond. Without warning, I turned the gun and fired a warning shot into the ceiling. The sharp crack of the gun echoed through the building, and the two enforcers flinched. Marcus took a small step back, his eyes narrowing. You're going to regret this, he said, his voice low and venomous, but I didn't back down. No, Marcus, the only thing I regret is not doing this sooner. The enforcers hesitated, unsure of whether to act. But Marcus, for the first time, looked uncertain. The balance of power had shifted. I don't need to kill you to make my point, I said, lowering the gun just slightly. I'm not like you, but I will make sure the world knows what you've done. I will make sure you're exposed. Devereaux seemed to contemplate my words for a long moment. Then he sighed. You'll never win, Sarah. You'll never beat me. I already have, I said. The truth is bigger than you. It always was. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving Marcus Devereaux standing there, his empire crumbling around him. As I left the building, I felt the weight of the file in my hands, knowing that the truth was finally going to see the light of day. My mother's story, my story, our story, was no longer buried. The past had been uncovered, and the future was in my hands. And for the first time in a long while, I could finally breathe.